I always figured betrayals arrived with shouting, arguments, or hard stares, but mine came with a notification, a gentle vibration on the nightstand. That night, my husband's phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the trip we were taking the next day to celebrate our 35th anniversary. He slept soundly beside me with that heavy breathing that always made him seem like a man at peace. But not that night. Something made me look at the phone. Just one text message, one sentence, one clean stab. "Let me know when she's gone." And the sender, Chloe, my best friend for 20 years, my son's godmother, the woman I had shared secrets, tears, and countless cups of coffee with. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read it again, once, twice, 3 times, but the message remained, clear as a verdict. Welcome to Voices of Auntie May. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. My body turned to ice. My heart wasn't beating. It was slamming. I felt a heat rise through my chest like my very soul was burning inside. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just set the phone back down and looked at the sleeping man I thought I had known for more than half my life. It was then I understood that true hell has no fire, just silence. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the open suitcase on the chair. The irony was suffocating. I had planned this trip to Hilton Head Island for us to reconnect. I had hoped that away from the noise and our routines, we could find our way back to each other. And he was already planning a different kind of reunion. Chloe had always been charming, subtle, and elegant, with that smile that made everyone feel comfortable around her. I admired her. I defended her when others criticized her. And while I spoke highly of her, she was talking to him. There had been signs, of course, small gestures, quick glances, awkward silences that suddenly made painful sense. But when you truly love someone, you choose not to see. And I had chosen not to see for years. That night, while he slept, I decided I wouldn't confront him. I wasn't going to beg or cry for an explanation. I wouldn't humiliate myself by pleading for a truth I already knew. If they thought they could fool me, they were about to discover they had severely underestimated me. The next morning, I woke before him. I brewed coffee, ate a quiet breakfast, and acted as if nothing had happened. When he came down with his practiced smile, he embraced me from behind and said, "Ready for our trip, sweetheart?" "Ready," I replied without looking at him. As he talked about the itinerary, the resort reservations, and the weather forecast for South Carolina, I watched him, not with love, but with the cold attention of someone studying an enemy. Every word he spoke was another piece of the puzzle. Every smile was another lie I learned to recognize. And while I listened, I already had the first step of my plan in mind. I didn't need to confront him yet. I needed to watch him fall, without him knowing how or when. When it was time to leave, I looked in the mirror one last time before locking the door to our Atlanta home. I didn't see a destroyed woman. I saw a contained woman on the verge of something new. I didn't know if what I felt was pain or lucidity, but for the first time in many years, I felt like I was in control. On the drive to the airport, he took my hand. His fingers were trembling slightly. Maybe he sensed something. "You all right?" he asked. "Perfectly," I replied, with a smile I barely recognized as my own. The flight was silent. I pretended to read a magazine, but I was really thinking about Chloe, how they planned it all, how they must have laughed about me, and how that laughter would be the last thing they had left. My mind moved fast, arranging every piece, as if the pain had awakened a new kind of clarity. I knew what I would do: observe them, wait for the exact moment, and then act. When we arrived at the resort, he asked for the room he had reserved in advance. He said it with such confidence, as if to make it clear that everything was under control. I simply nodded. I smiled at the clerk, took the key card, and got into the elevator. Inside, the silence was heavy. The reflection of our figures in the mirror looked like two strangers. He was humming a tune. I was mentally counting the seconds until we reached our floor. When he opened the room door, everything was perfectly arranged: flowers, chilled wine, and a welcome note from the resort manager that read, "A special couple's welcome." I looked at him and feigned surprise. "What a sweet touch, huh?" I said. "You deserve it," he replied, kissing my forehead. His lie smelled of expensive cologne and old guilt. While he showered, I went to the window. The view was beautiful: the ocean, the lights of the Harbor Town Pier, the promise of a quiet evening. But behind that beauty, I felt something else, a shadow moving toward us. I realized that destiny sometimes has a cruel sense of humor. This was the same resort where we celebrated our 10th anniversary, the same place where years ago he promised he would never hurt me. And now, 35 years later, it would be the stage where his full betrayal would be uncovered. But I didn't plan to do it with tears. I didn't plan to do it with anger. My revenge would be precise, silent, and clean. That night when he came out of the bathroom, I faked a yawn. "I'm exhausted," I said. "Rest up, honey. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Yes, it will," I whispered. I waited for him to turn off the light. His breathing grew deep. The clock showed 12:30 a.m. I gently took his phone and unlocked it with his fingerprint while he slept. There it was. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the resort. She'll be gone by then." Beneath that, a location pin. The very same resort, the very same room. The appointment was set. I locked the phone, turned off the screen, and smiled. They didn't know that the victim could also be the hunter. I didn't sleep that night. I planned every detail. I knew Chloe would arrive the next day. I knew he would leave to find her, convinced I was shopping or having breakfast in the resort restaurant, but I would be closer than they imagined. I prepared the small camera I always carried in my purse, checked the battery, and set the time. At 9:30 the next morning, I dressed calmly, gathered my things, and left the door slightly ajar. There was no fear, no trembling, just one certainty. The game had begun. There are silences that kill more than a shouted word. Mine began that morning when I sat across from my husband at the resort breakfast and pretended everything was fine. He talked about the scenic drives, the weather, and how expensive the breakfast buffet was. I just watched him. Every gesture was a rehearsed scene. Every smile was a fresh coat of paint over an enormous crack. I couldn't believe the man I had shared half my life with was sitting there so casually, planning his day, while the message from another woman sat in his pocket. As I stirred my coffee, I remembered the first time I met Chloe. It was 1994. I had just moved to the neighborhood in Atlanta with my young children, trying to adjust to a new, modest life. She was the first one to knock on my door. She brought a carrot cake and a huge smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood, neighbor," she said, with that warmth that just disarms you. From that day on, she became part of my life. We shared afternoons of conversation, secrets, and laughter. When Marcus was late from work, she was the one who kept me company so I wouldn't feel alone. When my kids got sick, she was the first to show up with medicine and comforting words. And when I trusted her more than anyone, that's when she started to slowly dig the hole where she would bury my trust. I clearly remember the first time I saw her look at him differently. It was at a family gathering. He was grilling barbecue in the backyard, and we were all joking around. At one point, Chloe walked over to bring him a glass of wine. Her fingers brushed against his. It was barely a second, but it was enough for something inside me to clench. That look, that subtle smile you barely notice, but that screams louder than any word. She was looking at him the way I no longer did, and he, instead of looking away, held her gaze, just for 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds changed something forever. Since then, I started noticing details. Messages he quickly erased, calls he took on the balcony, new excuses to go out without me. Nothing serious enough to accuse him, but strange enough to poison the peace. "You're overreacting, Serena," Chloe would tell me when I told her my suspicions. Men are just absent-minded, that's all. And she said it so convincingly that I ended up believing her. What an irony! I was telling my fears to the woman who was causing them. Years passed, and the distance between Marcus and me grew like a shadow that stretched without anyone stopping it. He became colder, more cutting. Sometimes he'd hug me without really touching me, and when he did, I felt like I was hugging someone who was absent. But I stayed there, holding on to the unsustainable. Women in my community were raised with the notion that love endures everything, that marriage is sacred and forever, that you have to keep quiet for the sake of the family. And I kept quiet. I kept quiet for years while the betrayal grew in silence until it became a permanent fixture. While we ate breakfast at the resort, I observed him with different eyes, not eyes of love, not even eyes of hatred. I looked at him the way you look at a stranger who lives with you out of habit, and it was in that instant I realized I had been sleeping with a stranger for years. "You all right?" he asked, noticing my silence. "Yes, just a little tired. Don't worry, you can rest after breakfast." "I will rest," I replied, hiding the irony in my voice. He had no idea what I was planning. He thought he still had control, but he didn't know the board had already been flipped. After breakfast, we went for a walk on the beach. The wind was soft and the ocean immense. We looked like a happy couple to anyone who saw us pass. Him holding my arm, me smiling naturally. But inside me there was a hurricane. He spoke, and I listened from a distance. His voice sounded hollow, like an old recording. At some point, he took my hand and said, "Serena, you know what? I'm so glad we took this trip. Lately, I felt like we were disconnected." "Me too," I replied calmly. "But don't worry, soon everything will be back in place." If only he had known the weight of my words. In the afternoon, I went alone to the resort village shops with the excuse of buying souvenirs. In reality, I needed to think clearly. I walked among the stalls, watching other people's lives continue as if nothing were wrong. The noise, the voices, the colors, everything contrasted with the emptiness I felt inside. I took out my phone, opened my email, and forwarded the screenshots of the message I had read to my own private account. Afterward, I installed an automatic recording app on his phone. The idea was now clear in my mind. I wouldn't face the betrayal with words, but with evidence. That night, he dined with me as if nothing had happened. He ordered wine, toasted to us, to our years together. His words sounded like cheap theater. Meanwhile, I was counting the minutes until the next day. At 10 p.m., Chloe sent a new text. I saw the notification flash on his screen while he slept. "All set. See you at 10:15. Use the spare key card. You know where it is." It wasn't a coincidence. Everything was planned, and without knowing it, he himself had given me the final clue. That night before sleeping, I looked at him one last time with tenderness. Yes, tenderness, because despite everything, part of me still loved him. Or at least, loved the man I thought he was. But this tenderness was different. It was the kindness of someone saying goodbye forever. I realized that deep down, I wasn't just seeking revenge. I was seeking to reclaim something I had lost, my dignity. And when I turned off the nightlight, I knew with absolute certainty, tomorrow, everything would change forever. Silence would be my weapon, and truth would be my vengeance. The sunrise came with a strange brightness. The ocean in front of the resort was serene, but something in the air warned me that this day wouldn't be like any other. I woke up before him. The sun barely touched the curtains, and the room smelled of wilting flowers and cheap foreign perfume. I stayed watching him as he slept. His face looked peaceful, but I no longer saw my husband. I saw the actor who had played his role for too long. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. I slowly got up, grabbed a notepad from the drawer, and wrote a few lines. "Today, I'm going to show you who I really am." I left it under the pillow, right where he would put his head later. Then I looked in the mirror. My face was tired, but my eyes were alive. I wasn't a broken woman. I was a woman who had decided to stop being a victim. While dressing, I mentally reviewed every detail of the plan. The camera was ready, the recording app was installed on his phone, and my emails were protected with a new password. Nothing could fail. It wasn't an impulse. It was the result of an entire night spent thinking without tears. At 9 o'clock, he woke up. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Perfectly," I lied with a smile. "We could go down to the pier today and then have lunch together." "Sure, but first I want to go to the resort spa," I said, feigning lightness. "I need to relax a bit." He nodded. I gave him a quick kiss and left, carrying the small camera in my purse and a serenity I didn't even understand myself. The spa was on the top floor, right across the hall from the most expensive suites. I sat in the waiting area with a magazine, pretending to read. From there, I could discreetly observe the room we had reserved. The plan was simple: pretend to leave, and leave the door slightly ajar, just enough for him to think I had gone out. At 9:45, I went down to the room and placed the camera in a corner of the closet with a direct view of the bed. I checked the angle, adjusted the sound, and verified the connection. For once, technology would be my ally. Then I opened the suitcase and took out the blue dress he always said looked too good on me for my age. I smiled. Yes, I would wear it. Not for him, but to close my own circle with dignity. At 10 a.m., everything was ready. I left the room door slightly open. I grabbed my purse and pretended to leave, but instead of going to the spa, I hid in the adjoining hallway behind a column where I could see without being seen. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. At 10 minutes past 10, I heard footsteps. I would recognize that voice anywhere. It was my husband talking on the phone. "Yes, Chloe, come now. She just left." My hands went cold. Even knowing what was going to happen, hearing it was like a fresh stab wound. I heard the click of the door opening. I held my breath, then a brief silence, and his voice. "You look gorgeous as always." And hers, sweet and familiar. "I thought we'd never pull this off, Marcus." I couldn't see them from my hiding spot, but I could imagine them. Two people who confuse desire with love and lies with freedom. Several minutes passed. I heard laughter, murmurs, the unmistakable sound of a stolen kiss. The camera recorded everything, cold and impartial. I just watched from the hallway, feeling a mixture of rage and triumph. It wasn't a spectacle of jealousy. It was the confirmation of what I always knew. Suddenly, I heard Chloe's voice. "And what if she finds out?" "She won't," he said. "She's so trusting, so blind. Poor Serena." Chloe laughed. "Not poor, naive," he corrected. Those two words pierced me. Naive. It was curious. They had confused my silence with weakness, my calmness with stupidity, but that mistake would be their ruin. I stayed in the hallway until I heard the door close again. Chloe was gone. He stayed inside for a few more minutes, perhaps mentally reviewing what he had just done. Then he left in a rush, as if afraid someone might see him. I waited a couple of minutes before entering. The air inside the room was thick, impregnated with cheap perfume and guilt. I looked in the mirror and faced my reflection. There were tears held back in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I walked to the closet and stopped the recording. The camera blinked once and saved the file. I reviewed the video. There they were. He and Chloe, together, laughing, touching, lying. I had everything I needed. I sat on the bed, holding the phone. For a moment, I thought about deleting it, about letting it all go and pretending nothing had happened. But no, that stage was over. I sent the video directly to my email, along with the previous evidence. As I did so, something inside me broke, but not from pain, from liberation. It was as if by pressing send, I was also sending away years of humiliation. Then I put the camera away, closed the suitcase, and headed to the lobby. I needed air. The ocean was deep blue, the sky clear. I walked along the pier with slow steps, feeling the wind caress my face. I thought about Chloe, about how easy it had been for her to steal what wasn't hers. But I also thought about myself, about how I had allowed others to manage my life. I stopped in front of the horizon and whispered, "No more." That sentence was a pact with myself. I would no longer be the woman, waiting for explanations. I would no longer be the faithful wife, swallowing her dignity to sustain an empty marriage. From that moment on, I would be the architect of their fall. I returned to the resort with a faint smile. He was at the bar, faking a work call. When he saw me, he raised his hand and said, "Honey, how was the spa?" "Wonderful," I replied. "I feel like new." We sat together and ordered a glass of wine. He talked about business, the weather, and trivialities. I just listened, wondering how he could lie with such calmness. He was a perfect actor, but he didn't know that his show was already over. That night, I slept peacefully. I knew the next day would be the beginning of the end, and as I closed my eyes, I felt that the naive, blind, and silent Serena had been left behind. The woman who would wake up tomorrow would be someone new, someone who no longer feared losing him, because she understood she had lost him a long time ago. The next morning dawned with a strange air, as if even the sun knew something was about to break. I woke with a feigned calm. He was still sleeping on his back, with that expression of false innocence that fooled me for so many years. I watched him for a long time, trying to remember the last time I loved him without fear, without doubts, without distance. I couldn't remember it. When love dies, it doesn't happen all at once. It goes out like a candle burning in silence, without calling attention to itself. And that day, facing the man who was once my everything, I knew the flame had completely extinguished. I got up, opened the curtains, and let the light in. "Good morning," I said, with a voice that sounded too normal. "Morning, honey," he replied, stretching as if he had no sins to hide. While he showered, I discreetly checked the camera I had hidden the morning before. The battery was still charged. The green light blinked patiently. The device, like me, waited for the moment to record his fall. Breakfast passed without incident. He talked about the boat ride, dinner that night, the nearby beach. His speech was so trivial it was almost offensive. I nodded, smiling courteously, like an actress in a play I already knew by heart. But behind that pleasant facade, my mind did not rest. Everything had to be perfect. Not one mistake, not one extra word. The trap had to close just when they felt safest. At 9 o'clock sharp, he said he had to go down to the lobby to confirm a reservation. He kissed me on the cheek and grabbed his phone. I pretended to be distracted by a magazine. I watched him leave without moving. When the door closed, the room filled with a new silence. It wasn't emptiness. It was power. For the first time, the silence was on my side. I waited a few minutes before getting up. I went to the door. I opened it just a crack and looked into the hallway. Nothing, but something in the air told me he had already made the call. I returned, grabbed my purse, and headed to the end of the hallway, where a small service door connected to the side staircase. It was the perfect hiding spot. From there I could see without being seen, thanks to a mirror in the corner. My heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and lucidity. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. At 10:15, I saw her arrive. Chloe, my friend, my confidant, my sister at heart, wore an elegant, discreet beige dress, as if trying to look innocent even in her sin. She walked with a firm step, not looking to the sides. My husband appeared a few seconds later. He greeted her with a smile so natural it hurt. "Finally," he said. "You have no idea how much I missed this." "Don't talk so loud," she whispered. "Serena's convinced I went to the lobby." That phrase made me suppress a bitter laugh. She was convinced, yes, but not of what he thought. They both entered the room. The door closed. The sound of the lock was like the start of a carefully rehearsed scene. From the hallway, I watched the reflection in the mirror opposite the window. I could see enough to understand everything. I saw them embrace, laugh, and talk with that disgusting complicity that only cowards have when they think no one is watching them. My breathing remained controlled. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't crying. I was just watching, cold and awake. It was like watching a movie, except I was the one who wrote the script. I heard his voice. "You don't know what I had to put up with last night." "Poor baby," Chloe whispered mockingly. "Sleeping with her must be a punishment. It's almost over now. I just need a little more time." "And after that?" she asked, resting her hand on his chest. "After that, everything will be ours." The rage rose in me like a wave, but I held it back. It wasn't time to explode. Every one of his words was being recorded, every gesture captured. The camera watched them with the same patience I had waited for them for years. Chloe sat on the bed, crossing her legs flirtatiously. "What if she realizes?" she asked softly. "She won't. She believes what she wants to believe. You always underestimated her." "And I wasn't wrong," he said. That last sentence was the hardest blow, not because of what he was saying, but because it confirmed what I feared, that for years my silence had been his nourishment. I leaned against the wall. My hands were sweating, but not from nerves. It was contained fury, an old fury that was now finding its outlet. I stayed there watching them for more than 10 minutes. Chloe laughed, he kissed her, and the faithful camera saved everything. At 10:30, she got up to leave. "See you tonight," she said, fixing her hair in the mirror. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too." She closed the door and left. He stayed inside for 5 minutes, checking his phone. I took a step back without making a sound and waited for him to leave. 5 minutes later, I saw him walk away with the same careless air as always. I entered the room. The smell of Chloe's perfume still floated in the air, the open wine bottle on the table, the glass marked with lipstick, the messy bed. Every detail was a silent confession. I walked to the closet, turned off the camera, and reviewed the footage. There were his laughter, their caresses, their betrayal, filmed with implacable clarity. While watching the recording, I didn't cry a single tear. I only felt a strange serenity, as if every second of accumulated pain had transformed into strength. I turned off the screen and put the device deep into my purse. It was time to use the weapon they themselves had handed me. I went down to the lobby and found him sitting at the bar, pretending to check his phone. I approached him with a friendly smile. "Did you confirm the reservation?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "All set." I patted his shoulder. "Perfect," I said. "Tonight will be unforgettable." He smiled, not knowing how much truth was in my words. That afternoon, I locked myself in the bathroom with my laptop. I downloaded the files and uploaded them to a private cloud. Then I sent the video to 3 email addresses. One for his downtown office, another for his business partner, the one who always looked at me with pity, and one more, to Chloe's husband, Thomas. There was no going back, and I didn't want to. When night fell, I put on the same blue dress he always admired. I looked in the mirror and took a deep breath. I was not a sad woman. I was a free woman. The Serena who had felt fear that morning no longer existed. The one who would now go down to the dining room would be someone new, someone who knew that you don't need a weapon to destroy the person who betrays you. Just the truth, at the exact moment. And that night, that truth was already traveling by email to its destinations. Every word, every image, every forbidden kiss, everything. Tomorrow, the whole world would know who they really were. And when the storm crashed down on them, I would already be far away, silent and unstoppable. The following sunrise did not bring peace. The ocean was still serene, but inside me, a storm was blowing that I could barely contain. I knew this day would mark a before and after. At 6 a.m., I was already awake, sitting by the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks. My husband slept deeply. He had no idea that in a matter of hours, his entire life would collapse. The silence was so dense I could hear the ticking of my watch. Every second reminded me that the moment was approaching. I didn't feel fear, but a frozen calm, a calm only felt by someone who has decided not to turn back. At 7:30, I went down to breakfast alone. He was still sleeping, or pretending to. I didn't care. I poured coffee and opened my notebook. I wrote a single sentence. "He who betrays forgets that the truth has a long memory." As I savored the first sip, I observed the tables around me. Couples talking about love, tourists laughing, families taking photos. Everyone seemed to live a normality that no longer belonged to me. I, on the other hand, waited for the collapse with the serenity of someone who has already said goodbye to everything. At 9:30 he appeared. His face looked tired, his eyes a little puffy, but he tried to hide it. "Good morning, honey," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Good morning," I replied softly. He sat down, ordered orange juice, and spoke about unimportant plans, the boat ride, the gala dinner, the return home. I listened in silence, studying every gesture. His hands moved nervously. His eyes avoided mine. Guilt has a language that needs no words. At 10 o'clock, his phone vibrated. He grabbed it quickly, believing I wasn't noticing anything. "Who is it?" I asked. "The front desk, confirming dinner." He answered without looking at me. I nodded. "Perfect. Don't be long," I said with a calm smile. "No, I won't be long." He stood up, grabbed his keys, and left the dining room. I counted mentally. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the 5th step, he was already talking on the phone. I knew what he was saying, even though I didn't need to hear it. I put my cup on the table, slowly got up, and followed him. The resort was a maze of carpeted hallways with gilded mirrors that returned distorted reflections of reality. I saw him stop in front of the room, look both ways, and open the door carefully. He went in. The door closed. I stood still for a few seconds. I could feel the pounding in my temples, as if my whole body were a drum. I took a breath, grabbed the camera in my purse, and walked to the end of the corridor, where I could see the door through a side mirror. I didn't need more. The scene was almost the same as the day before, but this time with something different. I was ready to end it. It was 10:20 when I saw Chloe enter. She wore a white dress and a wide-brimmed hat that tried to cover her face, but she couldn't hide her gait, the same familiar walk I'd seen so many times crossing my living room. This time, that step was leading her straight to her ruin. My husband received her with a broad smile, took her hand, and kissed her with the confidence of someone who thinks they have the world under control. I didn't look away. Every gesture, every word was a confirmation. I watched them talk by the window. She laughed. He leaned toward her. They looked like two lovesick teenagers, oblivious to the weight of their lies. The feeling they shared wasn't passion. It was arrogance, that absurd belief that consequences only exist for other people. For a few minutes, I watched them in silence. Then, without losing my composure, I took out my phone and opened my email. I verified that the video had been sent. Everything was in motion. The copies were already reaching their recipients, his boss, his family, and Chloe's husband, Thomas. All that remained was to wait. And that's when I decided to do something more. I approached slowly, walking quietly until I stood right in front of the door. I didn't enter. I just knocked twice. Silence. Then his voice. "Serena, is that you?" I didn't answer. I just waited. I heard them moving inside, clumsy and nervous. When the door opened, I was met with their two faces frozen in the air. Chloe's blouse was unbuttoned. He had the look of someone who had just seen a ghost. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a thin voice. "I wanted to see if the room was as comfortable as you said in your texts," I replied with a serene voice. Chloe paled. "Serena, I can explain." "I don't doubt it," I interrupted. "But I don't need to hear you. You've already done all your explaining in front of the camera." My husband's eyes filled with terror. "What camera?" he asked. "The one you failed to see, just like you failed to see me," I replied. Before he could react, my phone vibrated with several notifications. His boss, Chloe's husband. The copies had arrived. I looked him in the eye and said, "There's no turning back." "Serena, please," he shouted, moving closer. "We can talk." I stepped back. "No, there's nothing left to talk about." "I love you," I laughed bitterly. "No, Marcus, you love yourself. And you don't even do that well." Chloe started crying. "Serena, don't do this. My husband, my family." "Then you should have thought about that before you betrayed the woman who opened her home to you." For an instant, Silence filled the room. All that could be heard was the hum of the air conditioning. I looked at them and felt strangely at peace. There were no shouts or tears, just justice. Cold, clean, inevitable. "Don't worry," I finally said. "I'm not going to stay to watch the mess. I just came to say goodbye." I grabbed my things, walked to the door, and added, "Oh, and don't try to delete anything. It's already in the cloud." I closed the door behind me without looking back. The hallway felt long, but my steps were firm. With every step, I felt a weight fall from my shoulders. When I reached the elevator, I pressed the lobby button and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw no rage or sadness, just determination. When the elevator doors opened, the chaos had already begun. In the lobby, a man was shouting into his phone. It was Thomas, Chloe's husband, holding his cell with the video playing on the screen. The eyes of the guests were glued to him. A few seconds later, I saw my husband run down the stairs, followed by Chloe. His face was distorted, his eyes desperately looking for an exit that no longer existed. Thomas lunged at him, hitting him and screaming, "With my wife, you bastard, in the resort, right in my face!" The scene was chaotic, heartbreaking, and yet I felt an absolute serenity. It was the ending they had written, and I just let it play out. I slowly walked away while the employees tried to separate them. The sound of the screaming faded behind me. Outside, the ocean remained the same. The wind smelled like freedom. That morning, the resort became their ruin, and I, finally, became my own salvation. That same afternoon, while the chaos continued to spread through the resort, I locked myself in my room. Outside, there were hurried footsteps, murmurs, and phones ringing. The rumor had grown like wildfire. The recording was already making the rounds on cell phones worldwide, and I just watched in silence. I felt no guilt. I felt justice. I turned on the television. On the local news in Atlanta, my husband's name was already mentioned alongside the word scandal. One of the resort's security cameras had captured the altercation in the lobby. The images repeated over and over, him trying to flee, Thomas hitting him, people recording with their phones. Everything he had wanted to hide for years was now exposed without filters for everyone to see. And I just breathed. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The ocean was calm, as if the world wasn't ending down there. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone too far, but then I remembered his mocking laughter, the nights of contempt, the empty promises. No, I hadn't gone too far. I had only arrived where I needed to be. As the sun set, I opened my laptop and checked my email. Dozens of new notifications, forwarded messages, screenshots, headlines. Every click was a confirmation that everything had worked. Among the emails was one from Chloe. It just read, "Please delete it. My family has seen it. My son is crying. Don't do this to us." I read it 3 times. I didn't reply. At another time, I would have felt sorry. I would have wanted to forgive, but not anymore. You can't ask for compassion from someone who never had any for you. The next email was from my husband. "Serena, let's talk. All this can be fixed. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. Please, don't destroy everything we built." I smiled. He talked about a mistake, as if it were a slip-up, but his betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a repeated decision for years, and decisions, sooner or later, demand payment. I closed the computer and picked up my phone. I had dozens of missed calls. None of them were worth answering. Silence, once again, was my best response. I lay on the bed and closed my eyes. For years, his voice had been my constant noise. Now, for the first time, silence sounded like freedom. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, it was night. His phone was still vibrating. This time, I answered. It was him. "Serena." His voice sounded broken, desperate. "Yes, please, we have to talk. We have nothing to say to each other. You're destroying me." "No, Marcus, you destroyed yourself. I just turned on the light." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Why did you do this?" he finally asked. "Because I needed to see what you were worth without your lies." "And what are you going to do now?" "Celebrate. No. Live." I hung up without waiting for an answer. The next morning, I went down to the resort dining room. Eyes followed me, some with pity, others with curiosity. I didn't care. I ordered coffee and watched the employees talk in hushed tones. A woman approached me and whispered, "You are incredible. Not every woman would have your courage." I barely smiled. Courage wasn't what I had too much of. It was dignity, and they wouldn't take that from me again. While I was having breakfast, I saw Marcus walk past. He wore dark glasses and his face was swollen, as if he hadn't slept. He stopped for a moment, trying to meet my gaze. I continued stirring my coffee. He no longer existed to me. That afternoon, I received a message from Thomas, Chloe's husband. It just said, "Thank you for opening my eyes. I regret that your pain was necessary for me to see the truth." I stared at those words. They weren't comfort, but they were poetic justice. In one sentence, everything that had happened was summed up. My pain was the lantern that illuminated everyone's lies. I put away my phone. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was breathing without anxiety. I didn't owe explanations. I didn't owe apologies. I only owed myself. That night, before packing my things, I turned on the camera one last time. I recorded myself looking directly into the lens, not for him, not for Chloe, but for me. I said, "I am not the woman they betrayed. I am the woman who survived. And that by itself is vengeance enough." I turned off the device and packed everything away. I left the resort without looking back. Outside, the wind was fresh, the sky clear. I got into the taxi, and as we drove away, I looked out the window one last time. The building grew small in the distance until it disappeared. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness, but more than anything, I felt peace. When I got home, I found the door slightly ajar. It was him, sitting on the sofa with his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The man who was once my refuge was now just a ghost. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Waiting for you." "You shouldn't be." "Serena, I lost everything," he said with a trembling voice. "My job, my friends. Chloe tried to take her own life." "And you expect me to feel sorry for you?" "No, I just wanted you to know that I love you." "No, what you love is the comfort I gave you." "Please," he murmured. "Can we start over?" I approached slowly. I looked him in the eyes. There was fear there, and something else. Emptiness. "Marcus," I told him, "there's no going back. You lied to yourself so much you don't know who you are anymore. And I finally figured out who I am without you." I turned, walked toward the door, and added without looking back, "This time, goodbye doesn't hurt. What hurts is that it took me so long to say it." I walked out. The sound of the door closing was perhaps the most liberating moment of my life. That night, I sat on the terrace of my house with a cup of tea. The silence returned, but this time it was a good silence, not the silence of submission, but the silence of freedom. I looked at the stars and remembered something my mama used to tell me. "A strong woman doesn't make a scene, baby. She makes a move." I smiled because in the end, that was exactly what I did. The news exploded like a bomb, not just in the house or the neighborhood, but across the whole darn state. My husband, the respected executive, the man with the impeccable smile and family speeches, was now in all the headlines. Executive betrayed by his own ambition. Intimate video exposes affair with colleague's wife. I watched the news without moving a muscle. Every word was a confirmation. For years, I had lived in his shadow, hearing people call him an example of integrity, while I was just the quiet wife who always accompanied him. Now, his silence was mine. And his ruin was too. Reporters camped out in front of his downtown office. Cameras followed his every move. Social media was ablaze. Employees avoided him when he arrived, and his partners, who once called him a friend, stopped answering his calls. A week later, the board removed him from his position. I remember the call. "Serena," he said with a broken voice, "they fired me." "I'm sorry," I replied without emotion. "Are you really sorry?" "No," I said frankly. "I expected it." There was a long silence on the other end. Then I only heard crying, not the crying of a remorseful man, but of one who understood too late that all his power was an illusion. Chloe, for her part, disappeared from Atlanta. Her husband left her. Her daughter moved in with her grandparents. She tried to call me several times. I never answered. One night, she left a voicemail. "Serena, you don't know how much I regret this. I don't know what happened to me. I swear I never meant to hurt you." I turned off my phone. Regret doesn't clean stained hands. It just stains them with tears. Despite everything, I felt no pleasure. I didn't enjoy the scandal or the fall. It was something colder, deeper, a sense of equilibrium, as if the universe had finally adjusted the scale. But with that calm came something new. Emptiness. Because revenge, however just, doesn't always bring satisfaction. It leaves silence, and silence, when there is no hatred left to feed it, turns into reflection. I began to ask myself at what point my life had been reduced to waiting for justice. I had dedicated years to surviving his contempt, his control disguised as affection, his selfishness as a man who thought he was God. And now that it was all over, who was I? A free woman, yes, but also a solitary woman. One day, leaving the house, a neighbor approached me. "Serena, can I tell you something?" she asked conspiratorially. "Of course." "You did what many of us wish we had the courage to do." "It wasn't courage," I replied. "It was exhaustion." She smiled sadly, and I knew that even though my story scandalized many deep down, it represented all the women who had ever had to swallow betrayal in silence. His phone rang again one night. It was him, again. "Serena," he whispered, "I have no one. They took everything from me." "That happens when you don't take care of what you have. I need you." "No. You need redemption, and I'm not the one who can give you that." "Are you just going to leave me like this, destroyed?" "I'm not leaving you destroyed, Marcus. I'm leaving you responsible." And I hung up. He didn't call again. Days passed. The scandal began to fade, but the consequences continued to burn. His company failed, his friendships dissolved, his name became synonymous with shame, and I kept walking without looking back. People looked at me differently, with respect, and that was new. After decades of being invisible, I had recovered my reflection. One afternoon, I received a letter with no return address. Inside, there was only a sheet with a handwritten phrase, "Thank you for showing me that even the monsters can fall." I never knew who sent it. Maybe some woman who lived through something similar, or perhaps someone who simply understood. I kept that note between the pages of my journal. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, and I answer that I don't, because what I did wasn't vengeance. It was liberation. For years, I had been a prisoner of a lie, an image, a routine where my voice didn't matter. When I uncovered the truth, I didn't just expose him, I gave myself back to myself. That night, I went for a walk on the boardwalk. The air was fresh, the sky clear. I closed my eyes and let the wind mess up my soul. I thought about everything I had lost: a marriage, a friend, a lifetime of appearances, but also about what I had gained: my name, my voice, my peace. Because when a woman is free from fear, no one can dominate her again. I looked at the horizon and promised myself that I would never again love from need, but from choice. And if anyone ever asked me what it feels like to betray, I would answer, I don't know, but I know what it feels like to forgive myself for having allowed it for so long. They say that after the fire, silence always follows, but no one warns you how profound it can be. Several months passed since that storm, and the world seemed to have forgotten the scandal. The headlines changed, people found new dramas to talk about, but I continued learning to live among the ashes, not of pain, but of habit, of that life that once revolved around a man I mistook for love. I remember the first dawn after everything. The sun came through my window, painting the walls with golden hues. That day, I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't have to prepare breakfast, iron shirts, or fake smiles. I just poured coffee and drank it slowly, as if savoring my freedom for the first time. I looked around. The house was empty, yes, but also clean of lies. The air smelled different. It was mine. That morning, I understood that loneliness isn't always a punishment. Sometimes, it's the first act of self-love. Little by little, I began to rebuild my routine. I started reading again, painting, taking care of my plants. I reclaimed the time I had given to someone who never deserved it. Every flower that bloomed in my garden was a reminder that life continues, even after being torn out by the root. And then something happened that I didn't expect. I began to forgive myself, not for having exposed him, not for the revenge, but for having kept quiet for so long, for having convinced myself that patience was a virtue when, in reality, it was fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of accepting that I had loved a man who didn't know how to love. Forgiving myself was harder than forgiving him, but I did it, and with every tear I let fall, something inside me was released. One day, while walking in the park, I crossed paths with an elderly couple. He held her hand tenderly, as if time hadn't passed, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel envy. I smiled because I understood that true love isn't searched for. It's built when two souls know how to care for each other. And if you don't find it outside, you can build it within yourself. I became my own company, my own refuge. Sometime later, I found out through others that Marcus had left the city. He lives alone in a small apartment, without family or work. They say he aged suddenly, that he barely goes out. It neither gladdens nor pains me. It just reminds me that everyone reaps what they sow. And he sowed lies for years. Sometimes I think about calling him, not to reopen wounds, but to close the cycle. But then I understand that there are silences that speak louder than any goodbye. My silence was my answer, and in that silence, I found peace. One night, while organizing my things, I found the camera I had used to record everything. I held it in my hands. It was no longer a symbol of vengeance, but of rebirth. It had been my weapon, my shield, and my voice. For a moment, I thought about deleting everything, but I decided to keep it. Not as proof of what they did, but as a reminder of what I was capable of doing for myself. A few months later, I opened a small workshop in my home, Stories That Heal. Women of all ages came there to tell their pain, their anger, their betrayals. I taught them what it took me a lifetime to learn. Don't wait for someone to save you. No one will rescue you, but you can rescue yourself. The voice you most need to hear is your own. Every time one of them smiled through tears, I felt the circle closing a little more. My story, born of pain, was transforming into a bridge for others. One afternoon, as we finished a session, a young woman asked me, "Ms. Dubois, did you ever fall in love again?" I paused for a few seconds. I looked out the window where the sun was beginning to set and replied, "Yes, with myself." She smiled, and I knew she understood. Sometimes life tears everything away from you, and you think it's over. But what it's really doing is giving you the chance to start over without masks. It doesn't matter how much it hurts to lose what you thought was love. True love, the kind that doesn't betray, doesn't lie, and doesn't humiliate, begins when you decide never to lie to yourself again. That was my lesson, my punishment, and my rebirth. I'm 63 now. I walk slowly but without fear. I no longer worry if someone loves me. I love myself enough. I no longer seek justice, because life itself takes care of balancing the accounts. When people ask me how I survived such betrayal, I only answer, I learned to let the fire burn me so I could turn into ash, and from there, become light again. And if you've made it this far, let me tell you something. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to leave behind the one who extinguishes your light. It's never too late to look in the mirror and recognize the woman you were, the one who resisted, and the one who is still standing here. Because no matter how much they hurt you, if your soul is still alive, you still have everything left to live for. I'm Serena Dubois, and this was my story. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.